Hello, I'm Janelle.
Oh, I was bordering on being late. I'm so sorry.
You're not late.
Well,
Clock is
almost.
fast.
Is that it? Okay. I'd like to think that, but I don't know if that's quite right.
Okay, Sid, would you like to call the roll, please?
Certainly. Good evening. Commissioner Downs?
Here.
Commissioner Gary?
Here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Commissioner Marks?
Here.
Chair Grossman?
Here. Isabella Duke. Sid Schoenfeld, and so we haven't met in a bit, and we have an opportunity this evening to kind of get an update on most things, and apparently we have a nice report from the Aging in Place Subcommittee, which is good. So let's just get started. Approval of minutes first.
I move that we approve the December 3rd meeting minutes.
I'll second it.
Okay, any concerns, questions, anything wrong? If not, then I'll call for a vote. Approval of the minutes, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So, the next thing is there any public comments? Yes.
Hi, I'm Brian Beal, former member of the commission. Just wanted to say hi to you all. It was nice running into Margie, who was recognized for Citizen of the Year, and welcome Janelle Gary to the commission. Looking forward to seeing you guys accomplish more great things this year. And it's a pleasure to see the results of the soda tax or sugary beverage tax around town. So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any other public comment? Seeing none. Announcements from staff?
Yeah, I just have that one quick reminder. This Saturday is the second of our 3 sandbag filling assistance days. It'll be a Saturday from 10 until 1 in the parking lot of the Ocean View Park. So for those who need assistance filling their sandbag, staff will be on hand to fill them up and load them into their vehicles.
Okay, great, thanks to the city for that. Commission members?
So we do have some volunteers along with staff. So anybody that would like to volunteer, yeah, just give me a call and we'll plug you in.
You have to bring sand, though.
We do offer hot chocolate and cookies.
Okay, commission members, any announcements?
Nope.
I just wanted to mention that there's been some discussion on Nextdoor, which is a kind of often a good source of information, about that there might possibly be a development going on the hill, and a bunch of trees on the hill have been marked, presumably for removal. So I was wondering if anybody knew anything more than that. We're talking about the privately owned area on the west side of the hill. That land doesn't belong to the city. I don't know, I did reach out to one of the council members, and he was unaware of anything, but I was wondering if staff knew anything.
No.
Okay,
Not at this time.
well, let's keep our eyes on that. Let's see what that turns out to be. Any other comments? None? Then moving on, 5.1, rent review update on the Echo Housing rent review program. We have our 2 representatives with us. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Jonathan Torres from Echo Housing. So just a little brief history. So we are a qualified fair housing agency here in Alameda County. So we provide fair housing counseling and tenant landlord counseling. We've been doing it for decades. So we've hosted 3 rent review ordinance community workshops that commenced last year, the year before. So those are the dates that we held the workshops to educate the public with regards to, what is the rent review process, how does it affect landlords, how does it affect tenants. So basically, we kind of went and did the rundown of the whole ordinance and, really just educated the public about, who's eligible, who's not, who's exempt from the program, how to properly serve tenants when they receive rent increases, and then the requirements for tenants to request a rent review if they do get a rent increase notice. And then the conciliation and mediation process, and then other requirements that landlords are obligated to have, like the business license, and questions that they might have with regards to the process. As mentioned, when we decided to move forward to do the rent review process, we began immediately to provide the counseling and conciliation and mediation portions of the rent review ordinance. So far we've had a total number of 10 inquiries. Of those numbers, total number of renter counseling was 9. And then we've done 4 conciliations and 2 mediations. In terms of the inquiries, 1 of them was from a landlord, and 9 of them were from tenants. So in terms of tenant counseling prior to the conciliation, so generally when they contact us and before we begin the conciliation or mediation process, 3 households qualified for the rent review process because they were properly served, so they were entitled to the rent review procedures. And then 6 households did not qualify for the rent review because there's maybe a defective. The notice that was served to them was defective in some manner that didn't meet the procedures outlined in the rent review ordinance. Or they didn't meet the California statute in terms of service. So we've successfully conciliated 1 case out of the 10. And we were able to mediate 2 of the cases. So of the 9 cases, 2 of the cases were successfully mediated. 1 case was conciliated. 1 case, the tenant decided not to want to engage in the conciliation process. And then in 1 case, the tenant, the household was covered under AB 1110 for that type of rent increase. If you guys have specific questions about AB 1110, you guys can ask me at the end. And then 4 of the cases were obviously defective notice, so they weren't, the rent increase was not in effect because obviously the notice in itself was defective. So they weren't entitled to a rent review process, but we still provide them with tenant landlord counseling at the same time because if the notice is defective, the rent increase is not effective. Do you guys have any questions?
I know Mr. Campbell's interested in this. Do you know how much the city of Albany pays a year to Echo Housing to do the program?
So this yes, this is a fee for service. So basically, when they come to us, if it is a rent review, it's assigned to me, and I log whatever time I spend on that case.
So can you just give me an approximation of how much one case, just, it's probably hard to say, but just an example of,
Okay, so the general intake can take about 15 to 30 minutes. Because there's demographic questions that we have to ask, the facts of the case, and then we also have to review whatever documentation they request or they've received. So in tenant cases, we always request that they either fax it or they email it to us, or if they want to bring it to us, we can then review it with them. But generally, the bulk of the time is really determining whether the service is defective or not before we can even proceed to determine whether or not they're eligible for the rent review process. And then obviously, if we have to go through the conciliation mediation, that's more time because it's both parties. We have to be on the same page.
Could you, I know you've explained it in some way, and twice, I think, but I'm still struggling just because I want to make sure I understand. Defective service, can you just help me understand again what that is? And did I understand you right at the end of the implication of what the implications are in the cases?
Okay, so under the ordinance, in order for someone to receive a rent increase, they have to receive a notice of rent increase on top of a notice called the Notice Availability of Rent Review. Generally, a lot of landlords, they tend to go ahead and use the California statute or the civil code that tells them how to properly serve a tenant, which is correct. But because the ordinance supersedes state law, in this case, they always forget to provide that second notice called the Notice Availability of Rent Review. And so when it becomes defective, because they forgot to include that specific document, we've notified the landlord that in order for you to collect rent money legally, you have to reserve the tenant. So generally, sometimes they don't reserve them. They're like, okay, whatever. They don't want to proceed with it. But if they do want to proceed with it, they usually have to reserve them. So it buys the tenant more time because any portion of the defective service means that you have to be reserved again in its entirety. So if you gave them a 60-day notice of a rent increase and say the tenant finds out that they might be entitled to a rent review on the 45th day, but the notice was defective, and by the time we reach the landlord, say it's day 50, we have to inform the landlord, you have to start the process again because it's defective by nature.
In that gap, the rent does not go up.
Excuse me, I'm going to ask the commissioners to speak in their microphones. We're hearing from our staff that the recording is not happening because...
Okay. I'm sorry. In the interim that you mentioned, where there was a defective service and then a need to reserve, in that interim, the asserted rent increase is not in effect. Is that right?
No, it's not. It can't be in effect because then it's an illegal acceptance of a rent increase, basically, or rent money. So we usually try to stop it once we find out that it's defective. So when we do our intake process, I tend to ask about 100 questions because I want to cover my bases. And I always request the documentation because you can tell me something, but if you never provide me the documentation, I can't go based off what you just say. And so at times most of the time they always provide us the documentation, and when it's defective, we definitely inform them and we inform the landlord.
And what is the time frame for you to complete your investigation? You stated that it takes 15 to 30 minutes to do the intake. But like you said, if a tenant is given 30 days or 60 days, how long will that tenant have to wait to hear from you to complete your investigation? I guess my concern is if it's not within that time frame, the tenant is kind of, waiting on you or trying to find somewhere else to live. So I just wanted to get clarification on that.
Okay, so I want to preface by saying that I didn't come on board to be a housing counselor. So I don't generally take on cases for, tenant landlord or fair housing. But I do have a background in tenant landlord. And so I do the rent review, so I'm the only one who does it. So therefore, when it comes to me, I usually get on it that same day. It really depends on the tenant. If the tenant has provided me with the documents that same day, then I can then review it. But if the tenant In other cases, they take 2 weeks to give me the documentation. I can't contact the landlord based on what they've told me over the phone. I have to have the physical documentation. We request all the documents they received on top of the envelope that they received it in if it was mailed to them. Because if they was mailed, they're entitled to 5 extra days, as opposed to if they were personally served, they're not entitled to the 5 extra days. So I try to get as much as I can from the tenant, but if they come to me that same day with all the documents and I have them in front of me, I can call them that same day, I can inform them, and then I will tell them whether or not it's defective or not. I also want to say that if the notice was not defective, they have 15 days to communicate with us that they've received all the proper documentation. So for example, say someone received a rent increase January 1st, and they have all the documentation. They might not know that they have all the documentation, but they come to us January 28th, and I reviewed everything, and everything is sound, meaning that they have all the documents. I have to then inform them that they're not eligible for the rent review process because per the ordinance, they have 15 days after they've received everything correctly.
I'm wondering, and we have a small number of cases here, so it's kind of hard to know, but I'm wondering how the change in the state law in terms of rent control affects the work. Is it, do you see in any way that this duplicates what the state is doing? Does it, is it still important for this service to be available?
So just to clarify, you're mentioning AB 1482, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in Albany's rent review process, there is not a rent cap. It's just a rent threshold. Right. So anyone who receives above a 5% rent increase are entitled to a rent review process. Under AB 1482, there is a rent cap. So it's 5% plus the CPI, which in Alameda County, it's 4.1%. So the maximum rent increase that a tenant can receive in Albany is going to be 9.1% if they are not exempt from AB 1482. So say, for example, it's a single-family residence. They are essentially exempt from AB 1482, so their landlord can increase the rent 25%. They're still entitled to the rent review through Albany, but we don't try to enforce an AB 1482.
So essentially, there's still a significant population because of single-family and also buildings newer than 15 years, right, are also not covered.
Yes, so I mean, that's one of the exemptions is that if properties were built within the last 15 years, then that is obviously exempt from AB 1482. Unfortunately, the Albany rent review process doesn't have a rent cap, even though they afford anybody, any type of unit, anybody who rents in Albany affords them the rent review process as long as they meet the other criteria.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you don't anticipate that this is going to affect the numbers of people who might need the service?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Do you?
Excuse me, but can you speak in the microphone?
That might help.
Yes.
Do you anticipate any impact on the numbers of people who might seek the service because of the state rent cap?
I mean, yes and no. I think that one thing is that people might be calling us with regards to, I want to know about AB 1482. I want to be educated on what the criteria is. Am I an exempt unit? Am I not an exempt unit? But in terms of, are they going to come to us with a rent review process? That's going to, I can't foresee that. If they call us, we definitely assist them. But I think most of the calls that we received is mostly the educational portion of AB 1482. Mm-hmm. And that's because not a lot of places have rent caps or rent control. And so in Albany, there's no rent control, but there is a rent review process.
Well, there is technically rent control everywhere, right? In California.
Well, beginning now, yes.
Yes.
Yes, but if say you live in Albany and you're single-family residence and it's privately owned, then you're exempt from rent control.
Right. So they're still talking about
those. Or you're a
those.
duplex who's owner-occupied, then you're exempt from AB 1482.
Right. Okay. Anything else? Anyone from the audience like to ask a question, or?
I wanted to ask,
Okay,
yeah, so I guess my concern would be for the people that don't qualify for the process because they weren't served proper notice. Could you elaborate on what happens in those cases?
So say if they weren't served properly, they're not eligible for a rent review. But the rent increase isn't going to be effective. So it's kind of, we're stopping that rent increase. So if we're stopping the rent increase, then there's no reason for them to move forward through a rent review process. It's a defective notice. If it's a defective notice, you cannot enforce an illegal rent increase. If it's an illegal rent increase, you can't go through a rent review process.
So, but if they are then re-noticed and the notice is appropriate, then they can.
Correct.
Yeah.
And they're eligible for the rent review process.
Right, so they're not losing their eligibility, and it's just that the process hasn't begun effectively.
Right. So they've got an extension, basically. That's what we tell tenants is, you're getting an extension because there's a defective notice. But we always prepare them that once we inform the landlord, expect a re-noticing with the proper documentation. And so when we do reach out to the landlords, I make it available to them, the documents that they need to have, because this is a two-prong approach. You can't just educate tenants and not educate the landlords. So we always, we advocate for the law, and it requires both parties to be in the same consensus and understanding of what the process is.
Okay. Mr. Campbell, did you?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for asking about the cost of this, and I still don't understand what the cost has been so far. Can you give us a ballpark figure of what the city has actually paid to Echo Housing for this program in the past year, the first year?
Am I allowed to disclose that? I have a ballpark.
No.
I can have Margie answer that question.
Actually, it's difficult for me to provide that figure. I think probably the city would have that information.
Yeah, what we could do is provide you with the total amount of invoicing that Echo Housing has sent to the city. So we could do that. Yeah.
It's not that I'm being, I honestly don't know. I have a lot of figures running in my head right now. I have an organization to run, so the city would be your best bet.
Right, and this is not your only contract, is it?
I'm sorry.
And this is not your only contract?
No, it's not. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so Isabel, can you get that information for us? Yeah, okay.
Do you guys have any more questions with regards
Anything else? Anybody have anything
to
else?
the rent review process? I'm also supposed to be speaking about AB 1482. Is it okay for me to open up the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
So it's very detailed, so I'm just going to touch on like the major points, so not to take your time today. So just as a refresher, AB 1482 was signed into law October 8th of 2019, and it obviously addresses two major components. One is rent caps, and the other is just cause evictions. It's supposed to be effective as of January 1st of 2020, and it expires January 1st of 2030. And it's going to apply to, any type of tenancy, whether it's month to month or if there's a fixed lease. And then, obviously, in this presentation, there is other legislation that had passed that also impacts tenants and landlords. So the number one question we receive at Echo Housing is from a landlord generally is, am I covered under AB 1482 or am I not covered under 1482? So anything you see on just cause applies to rent caps, but I didn't want to duplicate it. But in rent caps, basically, if you have a rent review or a rent review ordinance or a rent cap ordinance that restricts it, that's more restrictive than the 5% plus CPI. So for example, like the city of Alameda has a rent cap of 2.9%. So in that case, for anyone who receives a notice of rent increase in the city of Alameda, the maximum rent amount that they can increase it is 2.9, which is much less than the AB 1482 maximum allowable rent increase. And then for just cause, the exemptions are single-family residences, whether they're owner occupied or not, or whether the owner rents up to 2 bedrooms. Again, single-family residences, unless it's owned by a corporation, an investment trust, LLC, then AB 14, they would have to apply AB 1482 to them. A duplex in which the owner occupies 1 unit would be exempt. As you mentioned, housing that has been issued a certificate of occupancy within the last 15 years, and university dorms.
LLC only applies when there's a corporate member, that LLC.
When there's a corporate member?
LLCs are not exempt unless there's a corporate member. One of the members of the LLC is a corporation.
Maybe we'll take some questions at the end. You come up to the podium. That way we get it recorded.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the major exemptions of just cause evictions is if a city or a county already has a just cause ordinance in place prior to September 1st of 2019. So for example, Union City and Emeryville, they have a just cause ordinance. So with those tenants that we handle, we don't apply AB 1482. The law is very specific that they've made that exemption for those cities or counties that already have a just cause protection. The unfortunate part to that is that, for example, Union City, while they have a just cause, they don't have relocation benefits in their just cause ordinance. So their tenants or their citizens or their residents are basically a bit shortchanged in that fact is that they do have to follow the Union City ordinance, but in that case, if they have to move out, they won't be entitled to the relocation benefits afforded by AB 1482. Again, single-family exemptions. If it's a single-family home, it's exempt from AB 1482. And if it does, the owner has to provide them with specific language that says that they are exempt from that property. If they don't provide that language, then they can argue that it's a single-family residence, but without that language, then we apply AB 1482 until they provide them that language. For maximum rent increases, again, so it's going to be 10% or the 5% plus CPI, whichever one is less. But in this case, it's the 5 plus the CPI. For Alameda County, it's 4%, actually 4.1%. So the maximum allowable rent increase is 9.1. What we're currently receiving is an influx of calls with regards to, what happens after January 1st if my rent increase happened before January 1st. So AB 1482 has a clause where if rent increases that happened after March 15th till January 1st basically kind of applies to AB 1482. So if the rent increase was, say, 12% June 2019, it rolls back to the maximum allowable rent increase beginning January 1st. And so that's part of why we educate tenants about what their rights are, because then they might say, well, do they have to give me the money back that I've paid? And unfortunately, they don't. AB 1482 is very explicit. They said, nope. Their landlords don't have to pay you the overpayment. They just have to start beginning to accept that they will pay only the maximum allowable rent increase. So they can only do the rent increase twice in a given month, as long as it doesn't exceed that maximum allowable rent increase. So 1 month, say they do 5%, 3 months later they want to do 4.1%, but they can't do 9% and then another 9% 3 months down the road. So for the just cause evictions, it prohibits owners from terminating tenancy without a just cause, which is really good. It forces landlords to provide a reason under the law. And so, you know, when we hear cases of my cousin Maria, she's going to move into the unit. Unfortunately, that's not under the just cause. There has to be a very specific allowable reason to terminate a tenancy. Oh, and a good one is expiration of leases alone is not a cause for eviction. So generally, historically, it's been found that when landlords and tenants finish a lease, it's time for you to pack up and leave. But unfortunately, with this new law, they can't do that anymore. You just roll over into a month-to-month tenancy. So for just cause evictions, there's two kind of pathways. One is at fault and the other one is no fault. When it's at fault, it means that the tenant caused the process of the termination of the tenancy. Usually what you find most of the time is defaulting on rent payment or the breach of the lease. You know, again, illegally subletting, refusing entry of the owner into the unit after proper notice. So if it's one of those reasons, then it's considered at fault. But if it's something not one of those reasons, for example, the landlord wants to move into the unit, the landlord wants a family member, and they're very specific on what they consider family members. The landlord wants to remove the unit from the rental market. And so generally, maybe they don't want to be in the rental business anymore. So, or the landlord decides that they want to substantially renovate that unit that requires more than 30 days, you know, for some specific reason, that's considered no fault. I'm going to briefly touch this. Basically, what you get a lot of the times is landlords saying, well, I'm going to renovate, I'm going to renovate, I'm going to renovate. But really what they're wanting to do is just paint the walls and get them out. So in the AB 1482, they created this substantially remodeling clause, which means that in order for them to use that as a reason, they're required to have a permit saying that they're making these substantial remodels. And it's usually a governmental agency, so perhaps the building department for the city of Alameda or the county, and it would require them to vacate the property for more than 30 days. And so cosmetic improvements such as painting, decorating, minor repairs, that doesn't really need to displace the tenants is not considered a remodeling reason. So when I mentioned earlier about no fault causes, when it's caused by the landlord, under the law, they're required to provide rental relocation assistance equal to 1 month of the tenant's rent, either by providing money within 15 days of the service of the notice or waiving the rent for the final month of tenancy, which is really nice. You know, it's good that tenants, you know, have this type of benefit because, again, you know, rent in the Bay is really expensive. I'm from Kern County, so, you know, it's very, very, very cheap to live out there. And then there is required language on these notices. Again, you know, they have to, tenants who are covered under the bill, they have to have specific language that says that they are protected under AB 1482, just as much as units that are not protected under AB 1482 have to provide that language that they're not protected. And then I'm just going to briefly touch on AB 1110. So Units, like single-family residences that are exempt from AB 1482 can then follow under AB 1110, which basically says that any rent increases more than 10%, the tenant is afforded a 90-day notice instead of the traditional historical 60-day notice. So now it's 90 days, which is nicer. That's about 3 months. Sorry, I don't know why it says 50 days, but it should say 60, provide 60 days notice. And again, these are for properties exempt from AB 1482. Do you guys have any questions?
Is it possible to get a copy of your presentation? Because
Yes.
the information was great. Thank you.
Correct. Sid has a copy of that for you guys.
Yeah, I could get you that. No problem.
Could we clarify the business about LLC ownership? I mean, I was just actually reading an article today about how much of the housing market is now dominated by LLCs and private investment firms. It's quite a significant percentage. Hence, would a single-family home not be exempt, right?
So if it's owned by a real estate investment trust, corporation, an LLC, my understanding is that if it's an LLC, you can go to the California State Secretary's website, type in the name of the LLC, see if it pops up as an illegit LLC. So that's usually a really quick way to reference it. And, that's my interpretation of AB 1482. AB 1482 doesn't really dive into, the logistical portion or the technical aspect of how do you determine whether this is an LLC. AB 1482 does say that the enforcement agencies to enforce these laws is going to be the courthouse. So what we're waiting is for case laws that go through the court system to fight these cases, to really figure out whether or not the courts are really enforcing AB 1482.
Okay. Did you have a comment?
Yes.
Okay.
AB 1482, I've read the text, I understand the text. AB 1482 specifically says that LLCs are exempt unless one of the members is a corporation. One or more of the members is a corporation. Many small property owners become LLCs just to reduce their potential liability for lawsuits, and I don't. I'm a sole proprietorship with the properties I own.
Yeah.
I don't want to pay the $800 a year that the state makes me pay, but because I'm cheap. But that is specifically called out in the law, and the text of the law is very easy to find. You can Google it, and you can see for yourself, it is right there in the law, that LLCs are exempt except when a member is a corporation. And I want to add something to this, and I want to say that I'm a little disturbed by these speakers saying how these are all really good things. They're good things for tenants. They're not necessarily good things for property owners. And the bias is a little bit appalling to me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Could we have your name, sir? I'm sorry.
Ed Crowley, I own a 7-unit apartment building.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Other questions? Yes.
Can you go back to the last slide? I know you skipped over SB 329. No, go back.
Which one?
The one about 329.
Second to last. SB 329.
Second to last.
Well, back one more. There.
That one right there. Can you elaborate more on that particular one?
Yeah, so SB 329, it's unlawful to discriminate against rental applicants with housing choice vouchers, so Section 8. So what is prohibited now is for a landlord to say, I'm not renting to you because you're Section 8. That's illegal. So, you can't have a sign outside that says no Section 8. So that's giving protections to Section 8 recipients. And this is not project-based. So there's a distinction between project-based vouchers and housing choice vouchers. So, we deal with both. And we definitely asked if they ever tell us that they're Section 8, we definitely ask them, are you project-based or are you housing choice vouchers? And generally, they'll know, the tenant will know if they're project-based.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Then I think that's it for the moment.
Yeah, so Sid has a copy of this PowerPoint for you. You know, he can distribute it to you guys. And if you guys have any further questions, you guys can feel free to reach out to me. And I'll try to answer the questions as honest and reasonable as possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on then to 6.1, aging in place. Margie?
Okay, I put a report on the back table. If anybody needs a copy of it, I have extra copies. I'm not going to read the entire report. I just want to go over some highlights of it. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention defines aging in place as the ability to live in one's own home and community safely, independently, and comfortably, regardless of age, income, or ability level. So both AARP and WHO, the World Health Organization, have taken on this aging in place and have a program that they work in concert with one another. And they both agree on what they refer to as the 8 domains of livability. When you're looking at an aging in place community, there's these 8 domains. Those include outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, housing, social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation and employment, communication and information, and community and health services. So over the next 20 years, and I know Albany's not going to be any different, the number of adults age 65 and older is going to double. So according to Alameda County, the city of Albany's senior population of citizens over 60 years of age is 2,918. I looked at it seemed really low to me. I looked at the housing element, and they showed for 2010 that it was 2,934. So, I mean, we probably won't ever get an exact number, but so to compile the report, we looked at numerous websites. I don't want to go into all of them. We met with Robin, who runs the senior center, and the senior center in Albany is wonderful. The programs are wonderful. They get from 100 to 300 seniors going through that senior center every single day, which is great. What I would say about the senior center is that I think we need to get word out there about what the programs are. I mean, there's a paratransit program. People that go to physical therapy get their taxis reimbursed for that. You know, that also goes through the senior center. Blood pressure tests. Albany citizens can now see a podiatrist for free at the senior center, which is a much needed service. So the senior center is fantastic. So in addition to the senior center, there's also FAOS, which is the Friends of Albany Seniors. It's a volunteer group that raises money for the senior center. So they help, they do a scholarship program for seniors that can't afford the classes or the trips. Some of them can be like $75 or, you know, classes. They're pretty reasonable, but, you know, sometimes they're out of someone's reach. And there is a scholarship programs that helps people get into those programs. So Alameda County did an assessment of seniors in Albany in 2016. Unfortunately, only 39 seniors responded. So, you know, we need to do much better than that. On December 3rd, Robin, who is our senior services supervisor, attended a seminar put on by the Bay Area Senior Health Policy Coalition. They are a part of the SCAN, Community of Constituents Initiative, building a statewide movement to transform the system of care so that all Californians can age with dignity, choice, and independence. So what Robin came away with some recommendations from that she feels very strongly about, and I support her on those. One of them is that Albany needs to join the network of age-friendly communities. So if you go to the page that looks like this, I know it's back to back. It starts out at the top. One is that Albany needs to join. That's at the top of the page. So we want to join the age-friendly communities. To join the network, an evaluation of seniors in Albany must be done. And Robin thought, from going to this conference, Robin thought it would be helpful to hire a consultant to make this happen. One thought that I had is that money for a consultant could come from soda tax money, because it would certainly help the health of seniors in the city. It's a one-time expense. It's not like every year we're going to be having this expense. It would be a one-time expense to come out of soda tax money, and I'll talk to some city council members about that. Another recommendation from Robin, and it came also from WHO and from AARP, is that we need a task force or a leadership team in the city to take this subject on. So they very strongly suggest this. We don't want people in name only. We want people who are really interested in what seniors in Albany are doing, and we want to put them on the task force. So then we have additional recommendations. The first one is really the most comprehensive. Any changes made to the city infrastructure would take into consideration the effect of the changes on the 8 domains of livability for seniors. Infrastructure is the fundamental facilities and systems serving a city, including the services and facilities necessary for its economy to function. Infrastructure is composed of public and private physical improvements. There are 2 types of infrastructure, hard and soft. So the city may have to institute some training for boards and commissions to recognize how changes being considered affect the senior population. But I think it's time that we look at any changes to the city infrastructure and say, okay, how will this affect seniors in our city? We recommend joining the network of age-friendly states. Membership provides a community with public recognition for committing to be age-friendly, resources for identifying and assessing community needs, access to technical assistance and expert-led webinars, support and best practice materials from AARP and WHO. So we get these all for free if we join this network. Conduct a livability assessment of seniors in Albany. AARP has a 16-page, and it's attached to these pages, questionnaire. This was a questionnaire that the city of Berkeley used. They made some minor changes to it and then used this questionnaire. So I think, we would recommend the same for Albany. So after the assessment is done, the city can use the results along with input from all stakeholders to prepare a multi-year plan for the city. I would like to see the city conduct a month-long city campaign about the programs at the senior center. It could be done during Older Americans Month. The center is fabulous for those who access it, but it would be great to reach out to those that are not accessing it and don't have an idea of what goes on there. In the City of Berkeley Age-Friendly Action Plan, they list a program being designed that will match UC Berkeley students who need affordable housing with older homeowners who have space. We could partner with Berkeley or start our own program. If you look at the questions, the AARP questions, a lot of them have to do with, people wanting to stay where they are. They don't want to move out of the community. They want to stay in the community that they're in, and they need things to be accessible and affordable. So these are the recommendations so far. I was hoping we could get the speaker from UC Berkeley. Do you know what's happening with that part? The professor? I sent you his email.
I didn't see it.
You did, because you responded back to me.
Yeah, but since then?
Yeah, I haven't heard from you. So,
Yeah, no,
okay.
I haven't heard, no.
Well, he's an aging expert, and I think it would be helpful to have him come and talk to
Right.
the commission. So,
Yeah, let's talk about that.
yeah, okay, so questions, comments?
Thank you. I guess my comment is, I agree that we should probably start our own program and do the research from other cities, not just Berkeley. I know Berkeley's kind of been the model for cities like Albany and their surrounding, but we want to kind of stand alone on our own. And maybe we can implement things that will help our seniors through the process of their aging. So, it's great to have the Berkeley representative to come in and speak, but I think we need to structure a plan that we can stand behind and call it our own. So
I would agree with you. The city of West Hollywood has a great aging in place, and it's been in place since like the 80s. So it's really, there are other cities. Fremont has an aging in place. There are
we can
other
pull
cities.
those
Yes, we
things
can
together
get the
and then,
best.
correct, that makes sense.
Okay, so a couple of things. Since what's on the agenda is an update, we can't obviously pass that this evening, so I have a couple of suggestions.
Okay.
It's not as clear as it might be why we need to join the network of age-friendly communities. And you alluded to some services that are available.
Okay.
If you could tie that together, because the council's obviously going to want to know, what are we going to get out of doing this?
Okay.
So I
can
think
do
that's
that.
important.
Yes.
In terms of changes in infrastructure, I think we also have to look at the existing infrastructure and not simply wait for changes to be proposed. We may want to propose some changes.
Okay.
And the other thing I think is, as the city becomes involved in changes that adjacent communities are making or that the county is making, I would like the city to also be reviewing those in terms of their implications for seniors.
Wait, I don't quite understand what you mean.
For example, the most obvious one is the elimination of parking at BART and the consequences that will have for seniors who live in Albany, who will, how will they then get to use BART if there's no way to park there? So there are various other things that are being proposed by changes to San Pablo Avenue, for example, that may have negative consequences for seniors. And alternatively, there are some changes that the city might want to propose to the county or to adjacent communities. For example, the city might suggest that AC Transit change the way it does some of its bus routes so that it would be easier for smaller numbers of people to get to the BART station if there were vans that ran more frequently rather than giant empty buses that run every half hour. So, I think we should be looking at not just Albany, but the broader Bay Area, because seniors are impacted by what goes on around us, not just by the 2 miles of Albany.
Yeah, okay.
I really appreciate all your work with this, Margie. It's very impressive. And thank you for that. And I just have one question and one sort of mild suggestion. My question is the AARP questionnaire the basis of both the evaluation for recommendation 1 to join the network and the livability assessment? Yeah.
Yes.
So if we did one, the livability assessment would be not needing to recreate that data, but to make this additional use of it.
Right.
Is that right?
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't at first grasp that, and it might be good in terms of, making it appear streamlined and less work. The only fear I had, it took one time I thought, wait, we're going to do one survey and then turn around and do another. And if that's not what we're doing, then you might just streamline that. And then I think I think a task force leadership team is a great idea, and the one piece I would recommend if this were to come back to us as a recommendation as a resolution for us is on the latter part of the sentence about the suggestion to form a task force leadership team. Claire, just to spell out one more time, I think it's totally clear in your spoken words, but what this task is. The way the sentence reads, it's possible to read it as you're forming a team in order to join this network, but I think the task is broader in your mind, and just laying out, if we're asking for that kind of time commitment from people, laying out as you've done, in your spoken testimony, in your spoken words, what that task is and why it's so important.
Okay. Yeah.
One more thing I want to comment on was on the last page where you're saying conduct a month-long city campaign as far as advertisement. I guess we would need to know more about what that looks like and what that would entail. Would a month-long, advertisement, would that help? So I think we need to, again, research more on what is needed to get the word out there to the seniors, especially those that don't have access to the internet or that are homebound. So how do we reach those to get the resources? Because we have a lot of resources here.
Yeah, I think Sid through Neighborhood Services is working on a plan to reach seniors who are really not available and not hooked in. Could you talk about that or not, Sid? I don't know.
I'm working with the fire department on an evacuation registration process for those who need assistance being evacuated. So it'll cross over a little bit for homebound and those seniors that might be in need.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what the connection is between.
Well, to reach all the seniors in this, like, what can we do to reach out to everybody?
Yeah,
not just, the usual suspects.
But this project is simply around evacuation, right? Is it?
Yeah, but it will identify
I see.
the homebound.
So this will be a way of identifying those people?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone wants to?
Well, I was wondering, if I'm going to continue, maybe I would have a fellow commission member as part of my subcommittee, but she might not have any interest in that. I don't know who
Who are you looking at?
Rather than put you on the spot, think about it.
Got it. Then we'll talk.
Okay.
Okay.
Brian, did you want to say something? No. Okay. You were looking like you wanted to say something. At any rate, okay, I guess that does it for now. Thank you very much. It's really great to see this moving forward.
So I will try to incorporate these changes that people have talked about and then get them to Sid, and you can get them to you then.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. Inclusivity, Greg.
Thank you all. So as you recall, last meeting in December, the commission passed a resolution asking council to consider a diversity report, and at the end of that past commission that had been proposed by Judy and me, and that at the end of that discussion, it was suggested to have a covering statement written up and submitted so that to cover it as it went forward to the council. So we submitted that, I can't remember, end of December, sometime late December. And at this point, when we started formed ourselves as a subcommittee this past year, or continued as a subcommittee, but with this particular configuration, Judy and I had two immediate goals, one of which was to pass, to write up a diversity report. The other was the equity statement that we passed earlier in the fall, and that is also still awaiting council. So I think that with each of those having gone through here and awaiting, council response, then I think the diversity subcommittee will have to have the opportunity to, kind of reimagine its horizons and figure out what's the next concrete step that it can, aim to try and take.
Okay, good.
Bart, could I? I had the opportunity to talk with Mayor Pilch recently, and he's very interested and wants to pursue this diversity that the commission has taken up. So you might contact Mayor Pilch.
Thank you.
And could I ask staff if you would put together a packet of all of the materials that we've now sent forward? They're scattered through various agendas, so let's put them into one place and redistribute them to everyone.
At the next meeting, or do you
Or
want
sooner
that
if
in an
possible, whenever's workable. Okay, thank you very much, Greg. The quarterly update of the Albany Project Hope, which was part of the packet. Project Hope is the Berkeley Food and Housing Project contract that we have on finding placements for homeless people in the city. And we receive quarterly reports, which we review, and then once a year we have a meeting with them. So have you all had a chance to look at this?
I would like to say something. After working with the homeless in Albany for over 3 years now, with the shower program, last year was the first year we saw any of our homeless housed in permanent housing, and they're still housed today. We saw one senior woman getting a brand new one-bedroom apartment for $52 a month on Shattuck. We had a family, mother and father and baby, that got a 2-bedroom for $400 in Oakland, brand new apartment. So we're finally seeing people. I mean, and I know that they're using the money to help people stay in housing that are at risk too. So it's really rewarding to see. And then another one of our clients last week talked about she's going to be housed in March. She knows already. So they're really excited about it for the first time. People are like, getting housed, and they are seeing other people getting housed. And they're staying in the housing, which is wonderful.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, it is good.
Any other comments or questions about the quarterly report? If not, then we move on to my favorite part of the agenda.
That's right.
So we need to elect a chair and a vice chair. My term is now at an end.
I nominate Greg as chair.
I second. Greg, do you accept the nomination?
Accept the nomination.
You better.
No, I just want, one thing about this commission, we've always rotated the chair, so everyone's gotten a chance. And I think that's really a good policy.
Yeah. Okay, so all in
need your
favor,
chance.
is there anyone else nominated for chair? Seeing none, all in favor of Greg being chair?
Aye.
Opposed? Greg, you want? No,
So we
okay.
need a vice chair too, right?
Now, next we come to vice chair. Nominees for vice chair?
I nominate Janelle as vice chair.
Second?
Okay. Janelle, is that acceptable to you? Okay. Seeing no other candidates, all in favor of Janelle being the vice chair?
Aye.
Aye. All right, you're the vice chair. First meeting, that's
Congratulations.
pretty quick. Good. And now, in terms of agenda items for next agenda,
So we'll put agent in place. I'll work on making upgrades to what I've done, and
and I will hopefully have a report on the housing forum. We're going to set up a time to meet. So we haven't met during the break, so we have nothing new to say at the moment.
Do we, do we need to reconstitute committees or the subcommittees, or do they roll over and then we see where our vice chair wants to slot in? Or I can't remember how that works on a year-to-year.
They continue as long as the work plan is in place, unless people want to make changes. Judy is on leave for 2 months, but will return to the same committees. And Janelle, being new, has her choice of where she would like to be. We do have to approve where, that choice, but anything else?
Do I recall that Mayor Pilch sent us an email about something to consider for future SEJC. Thought I remember an email.
It's ringing a dull bell, but I can't.
Hold on, but I thought there was something that he had asked us to consider, but I don't have service right here, so I can't pull it up either. I don't know, is there a way we could agendize?
Sure, we can.
We'll look at the email, and then we'll work with you on the next agenda, and then we can decide.
Okay, anything else? I would like to,
Can we do one last thing?
yes, go ahead.
Can we thank our chair for his service?
Oh, thank you.
Thank
you.
And for all of your work over the many years, but especially over this last year's chair.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I was thinking that if not at the next meeting, then perhaps at the following meeting, it might be good to have somebody from EBHO come and talk to us about housing. And I was also thinking that it might be useful, this is just something I would like to see us discuss on the agenda. We talked about involving the other commissions, and we haven't acted on that yet. But again, I think it might be useful if we had some other representation from the community. Housing is a very contentious issue, and people have very different points of view, and I think if we don't involve all those points of view in the planning, we may find that the Housing Forum turns into something that we don't want. I mean, we may find that there's a lot of conflict, and the more that conflict comes up in the planning, the better the planning will be. So I just wanted to mention that.
Well, this is probably too late. I just got this email yesterday from EBHO. They said tomorrow, which is today, is the deadline to submit this year's affordable housing guidebook. So if we wanted to be in there, maybe you could send them an email. I'll forward this to you, Bart.
So, yeah.
And we could send them an email saying we want our forum to be part of the Affordable Housing Week.
Yeah, well, is that what this is about? Because they said
It's
that would be
unclear
in
to
February.
me. It's
They haven't announced when that is or anything. I think that's something else.
Okay, I'll forward it to you just
Yeah.
so you could see it.
Yeah, the EBHO, which is the organization that organizes this Affordable Housing Week, we've been talking with them, and they could list us as one of the events, which will help with the promotion. But they said that would be in February. And the event and the forum would be in May. Anything else?
No, I just wanted to say I agree with you as far as the housing, how we move forward, because the gentleman, he made it clear about his feelings. But, you know, what I would like to see is as we bring county employees and people from organizations in to talk about that the residents don't attack him. He's just giving information that will help us do our job as well as city staff. So I think we just need to kind of control the atmosphere a little bit better so that when that gentleman or someone else comes, that they don't feel like, you know, this is not a safe place to provide information.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenna. I think that does it then. Adjournment, the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
All in favor?
All right.
All right, thank you.